got some, oh, there, yep, no. Before I begin, we had alumni dinner last night at the Student Center, and we had a great turnout. We had over 80 that showed up, and it was, for me, a blessing to watch past generations, many of whom I did not even know, be able to get back together and reminisce. And so it was a really good time, and the impact of what the Student Center does was visibly seen because it passes back to so many generations. And you got a picture of just how important it is for so many people in your life. So I think thanks to this congregation is due for allowing that kind of relationship to happen. I have a pop quiz. Audible. Just to get us thinking a little bit about the sermon topic this morning and how we sometimes take words and we miss their meanings. Some of these kids today have a completely, it is supposed to be English, but it sounds like a different language sometimes, at least to me. How about that? Cash me outside. That's English, and that apparently means something. I don't really know what. But one of the benefits as a campus minister that I get is exposed to a lot of the lingo, the new stuff that's being spoken about. And a lesson I learned yesterday or the night before when I was working on this lesson, I sent out a group text to my student directors, who I trust for the most part, and hopefully they will be kind with me and give me the information I needed. That was what I learned was an effort in futility rather. They texted me back all sorts of nonsense. So thank you guys for that. Did not help me at all. So I had to go outside of them and pull up some things. So I think everybody here is familiar with texting. And there's a lot of different words and abbreviations that for us who have kids or parents or grandparents, we see some of this stuff and we have no idea what it means a lot of times. Some of it is good to know, especially those with younger kids. So some of the younger kids may get mad at me this morning because I'm going to reveal some secrets that you probably don't want mom and dad to know. Let's pull up that first one, which is a pretty common one. And does everybody recognize that? LOL? I think that's the first one. Anybody know? Yeah, laughing out loud. It is not lots of love. I'll just tell you that. People that are in bad circumstances and you're trying to send condolences, you don't put LOL into that, thinking that it's lots of love, because they take it as laugh out loud. All right, what's the next one? Okay, so personal experience here. When I first started as a campus minister, I had done something that apparently was pretty cool, and so I got this text back from one of the student directors that said that was this word right here, and I was driving, and being the responsible person I am, you don't drive and text. I handed it to my wife. I'm like, what is this? Legged? And she looked at it and she was like, legged? What is legged? Neither one of us knew. It took us a while to get it figured out. It's legit, which is short for, that's good. I approve. Okay, next one. Anybody know this one? Oh, we've got somebody that's, okay, good, yeah. Parent in room. Yeah. Good to know. That's the next one. Any idea? Close. Parents are watching. This one has everybody stumped. Short for, go ahead, pull it up. Yeah. Who knew, right? All right, what's the next one? I love you. I love you. Yeah, good one. Most people know this one short for family, the fam. Any ideas what this one is? Okay, let's pull it up. Or anyone? Thank you, Greg. All right, one more, I think. one, I kept seeing this one too, and I was like, so much hate. I was like, why so much hate? I don't understand. One more, I think. Is that it? Is that the last one? Okay, good. We all know that using the right words at the right time is important. In fact, if you string together just the right words, then it is very possible for you to construct a beautiful sentence that perfectly communicates your thoughts to someone else. So the words that we choose to speak or write are important. On the other hand, as some of these demonstrate, sometimes the words that we use can get lost in translation, and their meaning can be misinterpreted. Look, I was up late last night with this ping pong tournament and alumni dinner, so I apologize. Okay, for example, you saw these, but I think another example that I came across was a letter that was written to a facility manager at a campground from a very polite woman who was concerned about the toilet and restroom facilities at the campground. So being of a polite and delicate nature, this particular lady thought that the word toilet sounded inappropriate. So in her letter, she decided to use the term bathroom commode. However, after looking at her letter, she decided that bathroom commode was also unladylike. So she decided it would be best just to abbreviate bathroom commode with the letters BC. The campground manager, upon receiving the letter, looked at it. He had no idea what the abbreviation BC might mean, so he asked around, and some of his employees got together, and they thought, well, there's the Baptist church just right down the road. That's probably what she is referring to, is the Baptist church. And by the way, this little anecdote here is not meant to offend anybody. It's just something that illustrates the point. So anyway, with that in mind, he wrote her back, and let me share with you his response to her inquiry. Dear Madam, the BC is situated 9 miles from the motel in the center of a beautiful grove of trees. It's capable of holding 350 people at a time and is open on Wednesdays and Sundays each week. A large number of folks attend in the summer months, so it is suggested you go early, although there is plenty of standing room. Some folks like to take their lunch and make a day of it, especially on Sundays when there is musical accompaniment. The acoustics are very good, and everyone can hear the slightest sound. It may be of interest to you to know that my daughter was married in the BC, and it was there that she met her husband. We hope you will be there during the time. We have a large meal, which will be very soon. We are asking for a small donation, and the proceeds will go towards the purchase of plush seats, which the folks agree are very much needed, as the present ones have holes in them. My wife has been under the weather, and unfortunately, she has not been very regular lately. In fact, it's been several months since she last went, and naturally, this has caused her a great deal of pain, and she would like to go on a more regular basis. I shall close now with a desire to accommodate you in every way possible, and I will be happy to save you one of our better seats. I'm sure you will enjoy going with the rest of us, and perhaps I will sit beside you myself. Looking forward to meeting you. Yours truly, Samuel Higgins, manager. It's a humorous example of how words, when not accurately used or understood, can lose their meaning and get lost in translation. This morning I want us to look at a word that may have lost its intended meaning over the years. And I think that as we return to the writer's original word, we might uncover something that will not only surprise us, but will also encourage us as we strive to grow closer to Christ. First word I want to discuss is doulos. That's the Greek that you see up there at that very first top one. and it simply means slave. In the New Testament, we find this word in the original Greek text being used between 130 and 150 times. It depends on your specific translation that you use. However, when we read our English Bibles, and most of our English Bibles use this word doulos, but it's not translated as slave. Not every time. In fact, the majority of the time it's translated as either servant or bondservant. And I appreciate Kyle reading the scripture this morning. We're going to look at that as one of our text examples where we see the word doulos translated not as slave but as servant. This word doulos never means anything other than slave. So the question that you might be wondering about right now is, why do our English translations not consistently translate this word, doulos, as slave every time? Why is there this inconsistency in our modern translations? And when I say modern, I'm going all the way back to the 1611 King James version. So the answer to this question is speculative. And I believe there may be numerous reasons as to why that particular word gets translated differently, especially when we view the word slave through the paradigm of our own history. For us, the word slave brings to mind images that are most likely very similar for all of us, at least in this modern generation. When people think about slavery, we are talking about a universal image that is understood across a world spectrum. And these images are horrible and grotesque. Now, I know that some translations like the ESV, and that's the one that I prefer, give an explanation regarding these inconsistencies, and I thought that it would be beneficial for us. I've actually pulled the excerpt out of my Bible, the ESV, for this explanation of the translation. So let's pull that up. There's a lot of words here, but I'm just going to read it. You can follow along if you can see that. A particular difficulty is presented when words in biblical Hebrew and Greek refer to ancient practices and institutions that do not correspond directly to those in the modern world. Such is the case in the translation of Eved, which is in Hebrew in the Old Testament for the word slave, and doulos, which is the Greek term, terms which are often rendered slave. These terms, however, actually cover a range of relationships that require a range of renderings, either slave, bondservant, or servant, depending on the context. Further, the word slave currently carries associations with the often brutal and dehumanizing institution of slavery in the 19th century America. For this reason, the ESV translation of the words Eved and doulos has been undertaken with particular attention to their meaning in each specific context. In New Testament times, doulos is often best described as a bondservant, that is, as someone bound to serve his master for a specific, usually lengthy period of time, but also as someone who might nevertheless own property, achieve social advancement, and even be released or purchase his freedom, where absolute ownership by a master is in view, as in Romans 6, slave is used. Where a more limited form of servitude is in view, bondservant is used, as in 1 Corinthians 7:21 through 24, where the context indicates a wide range of freedom, as in John 4:51, servant is preferred. So I can understand this logic, except one issue. The writers do not use different words. And when I say writers, I'm talking about the inspired writers of the Word of God. They don't use these different words. They use the word doulos, which to them meant that one thing, slave. It's a specific word. The word servant in the Greek is actually a completely different word, and it means something other than slave. In fact, in the biblical language, biblical Greek language, they have several words that are used for servant, depending on the context, and none of these words are doulos. Unless we forget, the New Testament writers are not arbitrarily picking the words to write. They are being very specific with their words because they are inspired by God, and God is intentional and purposeful with His words. So with that in mind, What if we left the word doulos as slave every time? Instead of changing it to servant, what are the implications for us today as we reread these passages where our modern translations have changed the word slave to servant? Let me just add this little addendum. This word slave in the first century, it's though more complex and diverse than what we might think of it today. Even back then, slavery, at its root, its core meaning, was that of a person who was chosen, who had been bought, who was owned, who was subjected, who was dependent, who was disciplined, who was rewarded, who was provided for, who was protected. And there was the expectation of complete obedience. They belonged to another individual outright. They had a master. At the core, this word doulos, as it's written in the original Greek texts, always meant slave, nothing else. So let's go back and look at the verse and read it again as it was written, replacing servant with slave in John chapter 15. Verses 14 through 17. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves. For the slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another. Which then actually matches much better a verse that we read in Galatians chapter 4, verse 7, where most of our translations actually do translate that word doulos to slave. So with what I just read in mind, when we read in Galatians 4:7, so you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. The implications, rather than a servant being elevated to an heir, but a slave being elevated to an heir. Well, you can see the difference. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20, Paul tells us that we are bought with a price. We have been redeemed through Jesus Christ's blood, which is the price that he paid for us. And that's a high price that he had to pay. That's actually a whole other lesson that we can talk about. Our value, when we're down on ourselves, we need to remember that we are extremely valuable to Jesus Christ, because he's not going to pay the price that he did for something that he didn't value. To give your own life for something means that you value that something a lot. When the New Testament writers describe salvation under the figure of being redeemed, they are borrowing a metaphor from the first century practice of slavery. Christ purchased believers so that they can no longer claim to be their own. Acts chapter 20, verse 28, 1 Corinthians 6, verse 20, chapter 7, verse 23, Revelation 5, verse 9. As slaves of Christ, we identify Jesus as our Lord and our Master. Romans 6:22, Romans 10, verse 9, 2 Corinthians 4, verses 5. 1 Peter 3:15. So to me, calling myself a slave of Christ, just as Paul did, captures a deeper understanding of not only our standing, but the true significance of our redemption. That as slaves, we can become friends and fellow inheritors of the kingdom, and that should be powerful and meaningful to us as Christians, as fellow heirs, as brothers and sisters. And because of this, I gladly take my shackles and my chains, and I remove them from the world, and I hand them over to the person who they belong to, Jesus Christ. You are a doulos. I am a doulos. We have shackles and chains around us. The question is, who holds those shackles and chains? One master, and the Bible also teaches you can't serve two masters, right? Those chains have to go somewhere. You can chain yourself to the world, the corruption in the world, the false narrative that Satan puts in front of us, where he tries to convince us that we definitely want to take our chains and shackle ourselves to things of this world. But we have chains around us. And taking those chains from the world and giving them to the rightful owner brings with it so many benefits. To have a loving master who gave his life for us, I'm proud to call myself the slave of Jesus Christ. So this morning, as we close, I just simply want to ask where your chains are. Who has them? Who holds them? They can't be given to more than one person. You got to decide. We're clear on this, and I've said this before. You can't be hot or cold. You can't be throwing chains over here and then coming to church on Sunday and saying, "Here you go, Jesus. Here's my chains today." And then you wake up Monday morning and you yank those back away from Jesus and you go back into. You can't do that. And that's probably one of the things that I see today as one of the biggest, if not the biggest issue with brothers and sisters of the church. We haven't decided. We're playing the ball. Here, let's try this one out, Let me see where I like these chains better. I need to hear this lesson. I need to know that I need to make up my mind and take those chains, the things that keep me down and chained to sin, I need to rip those away and turn them over to Jesus Christ. I need to hear that on a daily basis. I do. So where are your chains? Some things to think about. If there's things in your life that you need to rethink, if you need to get right, we offer an invitation at the end of every lesson as an opportunity, as a way to come forward and with the help of your brothers and sisters in Christ to try to get back on track, to get things right. Because let me tell you something. There is no one in here that doesn't have issues. There is not a single person in here that is not broken in some form or fashion. And that's the beauty of this church. People ask me, they say, I don't go to church because y'all are a bunch of hypocrites. I say, you're right. We are. We have problems just like everybody else. But you know what? We come together as a family, as brothers and sisters in Christ, and we get things worked out. We encourage each other. So the invitation is in part for that. The other part of that invitation is if you just have never responded to the gospel. Last thing that Jesus says while he's on earth, go make disciples. Bring people to me. Be baptized. come into that familial relationship with other brothers and sisters in Christ and become a fellow heir of what's been given to you. So if you have a need, you need to respond in any way to our invitation this morning. We're going to extend that opportunity right now as Alex leads us in our song.